Hello everybody, my name is Leith Van Onselen. I'm the unconventional economist, coming at you with my first ever macro breakdown. Now this is an experimental series which I hope to eventually get going daily, where I'll basically break down certain issues affecting the Australian economy, data releases, issues in the media, and sort of give my spin on things. Now the first topic I want to talk about today is my opinion that 26 million Australians have actually benefited from the closed border, that is the collapse in immigration. Now, this might seem like a bit of a controversial view, but it's actually supported by data and it's quite easily explained. First of all, I want to show you my recording area. This is my home office. Got a nice map of Melbourne in the background. Now, those of you who've been following me for a while will know that there's one thing I hate. It's when economists look at the aggregate economy without looking at the per person individual experience. Now, I've often argued for years in macro business and elsewhere that there's no point growing the economic pie through population growth if everyone's slice of that pie does not improve. Especially when you consider other external factors like, having to deal with more traffic congestion, having to live in a smaller house because there's more people now in a given urban area. All those sorts of things, housing affordability, infrastructure pressures, impacts on the environment, all these sorts of things economists tend to not look at enough. And they tend to focus on the whole pie of the Australian economy, but not the individual lived experience. And that's a topic I want to get to today. Now, as we know, I'm going to go through a bit of data here. The immigration intake into Australia has collapsed over the pandemic. So basically, in the 15 years before COVID hit, Australia averaged about 230,000 net overseas migration. And that was a massive step up from the 80,000 a year per annum average that we had basically from Federation. And since the pandemic hit, and obviously the borders shut and we had temporary migrants go home, our immigration intake has gone from positive 230,000 to negative 90,000 over the pandemic. Now that obviously, other things equal will shrink the economy because less inputs in people means less outputs in GDP. But I'd argue that that doesn't matter because it's what everyone's share of the pie. It's how everyone shares that pie that matters. Now, on this front, the data is actually very positive. Now, yesterday, the Australian national accounts were released for the December quarter. And what this showed is that the aggregate Australian economy has actually grown below trend over the pandemic. And now this is the chart on the left here. The red bars here show the Australian economy, like this, the GDP growth during the pandemic. And the blue bars show the GDP growth pre-pandemic. And I've put in a bit of a trend line here. You can see that the aggregate GDP growth is actually less over the pandemic. This is purely because we've gone, again, from importing 230,000 people a year to losing people. And just to put some actual numbers on that, over the 2018 and 2019 calendar years, Australia's real GDP grew by 4% over those 2 calendar years. But over the last 2 calendar years, during the pandemic, it's grown by only 3.4%. So it's grown a little bit more slowly. But here's the rub, and this is the thing that matters. Per capita GDP, because of this lower population growth, has actually gone up. So again, the red bars here show the pandemic experience of per capita GDP versus the blue bars, which show the pre-pandemic experience. And over the 2018 and 2019 calendar years pre-pandemic, Australia's GDP per capita grew by 1.5%, whereas over the last 2 years, the same amount of time, the 2020 and 2021 calendar years, Australia's GDP per capita has grown at almost double that rate at 2.7%. So what this tells you is that although the economic pie hasn't grown as quickly, everyone's slice of that pie has improved, and Australians have actually gotten richer in a material sense. Now, these results also extend to the labour market. Again, over the pandemic, jobs growth has actually lagged. So despite all the stimulus and all the talk about this massive economic recovery, aggregate jobs growth has actually lagged over the pandemic. Yet somehow, the unemployment rate and the underemployment rate has fallen to a 14-year low. How is that? How is it that jobs growth's lagged but unemployment has fallen to a 14-year low? But wait, there's more good news. We've now got the tightest jobs market on record. The number of unemployed per jobs vacancy is tracking at historical lows, record lows. The same with the number of underutilised, which is both unemployment and underemployment, per job vacancy is also tracking at record lows. Gee, that's good, isn't it? More people in jobs. Oh, wow, it gets even better. The employment to population ratio, so the percentage of the population that's employed, is the highest on record. Again, this is all off the back of very, sluggish jobs growth over the pandemic. How could this be? We've got 14-year low unemployment, underemployment. We've got the lowest number of unemployed per job vacancy. We've got the highest ratio of people employed to the population. It's all very obvious, ladies and gents. It's because the labour supply has stopped growing because of the collapse in immigration. Now, what this chart shows you, it shows you the actual labour supply in the blue line, which was rising very strongly pre-pandemic by about 25,000 people per month, and over the pandemic has stagnated. It's basically stayed flat. The green line here shows you what would have happened had the immigration continued at the pre-pandemic rate. Now, by my calculations, Australia would have more than 450,000 more working age people in the economy if immigration had continued at its pre-COVID rate. So despite the fact that we've got low jobs growth, we've got the best employment conditions for generations, all because immigration has collapsed. This is a good news story, but unfortunately, our treasonous politicians want to reboot the status quo. The chart on the left here shows Australia's historical immigration average, all the way from Federation to now. And our immigration has averaged about 80,000 per year over that 120-year period. As you can see here, in 2005, immigration ramped up massively. It went from around about 80,000 per year to about 230,000. Over the pandemic, immigration's collapsed. But now the federal government in the intergenerational report wants to reboot immigration to 235,000 people per year for the next 40 years. Next 40 years. Now what this means, and this is the chart on the right, comes straight from the intergenerational report. What this means is that Australia's population is going to grow by about 13.1 million people. That's 50% over the next 40 years. Now that's the equivalent of adding a Sydney, a Melbourne and a Brisbane to Australia's existing population. Just imagine what they'll do to housing affordability, infrastructure, the Australian environment, to the unemployment rate, to wages. It's going to be an absolute disaster. In fact, the Morrison government last November announced that it's targeting to import at least 200,000 migrant workers into Australia by July this year. Well, obviously, this is going to increase the labour supply, and it's going to raise unemployment and put downward pressure on wages. It's not what we want. And all this immigration reboot will mean is that the aggregate economy will grow while per capita living standards again stagnate. It's also going to raise pressure on the unemployment rate and put downward pressure on wages. It's going to raise unemployment, put downward pressure on wages. It's basic statistics. The big question is, why the hell are they doing this? Australian voters do not want this big Australia immigration. Two recent polls, one from the Australian Population Research Institute released late last year, and another one by the Resolve Political Monitor, which was released just last week or the week before, shows that around 2/3 of Australians don't want higher immigration. So what the hell's the government doing? Why is it that they're so gung-ho to reboot immigration back to these extreme levels when Australia doesn't want it, and it's bad for our living standards? It's an absolute joke. Well, I'll tell you, ladies and gents, the answer's obvious. It's because the lobby groups that pull our government strings demand this. I'm talking about big business, the property lobby, and education migration industry. They all love big Australia because they get to privatise the gains while the costs are socialised on the ordinary Australian. Anyway, that's enough for me. I'll be talking about this issue a lot over coming months, and I'll look forward to doing further videos. If you like this video, please leave a like, share it out, and subscribe to the channel because I plan to do a lot more of this content. Thanks a lot for watching.